What's a totally random, obscure fact that you know? Story 1: when somebody is cremated, metal implants, such as hip replacements, and any hardware used to repair the body, survives the cremation process. If you have a loved one being cremated, you can sometimes request that the hardware be returned. If not, the metal implants are recycled as normal metal scrap, since they're technically sanitized as part of the cremation process. My father in law had so many replacement parts, hip, knee, and elbow, I believe, that we always joked that we would just take him to the scrapyard when he passed. It's been a year now since he's been gone. We miss him terribly, and I honestly don't know what happened to the metal in his body after cremation. Story 2: the USPS flat rate boxes have a maximum weight limit. However, the small flat rate box is such that even if you filled its entire interior volume with the most dense, naturally occurring known element on the periodic table asterisk, osmium, it still wouldn't go over the maximum weight limit. Yes, there are heavier elements on the periodic table, but osmium's molecular structure makes it more dense than the other heavier elements. Story 3: bananas are berries, but strawberries are not. According to botanical definition, botanically a tomato is a fruit, but legally it is a vegetable. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled this in the 1893 case Nix vs. Hedin for tariff purposes. And if you're in the EU and think my random American facts don't matter, carrots are legally considered fruits in the EU. Jams can only be made from fruits, and there's a Portuguese jam made from carrots. Story 4: at the time of the French Revolution, the majority of people in France did not speak French. I looked it up, and from what I gather, most people spoke regional languages over proper French, and only about half the population could speak French. But it also says that in 1871, only a quarter did so as their native language. Sorry, my linking function is weird, and I can't link sources. That's a rather accurate take. The modern French was crafted around royal power centers, mostly Paris. Written French could be sent all over the realm through letters and books. Straightening a final version of French was a lengthy process. It took a few hundred years, and even with all that work, some rules have changed along the way. King Charles V produced administrative documents in French and not Latin for general clarity. He had other important texts translated into French. Later, bodies like the Pléiade and l'Académie Française also worked to that end. On French soil, apart from court-approved French, were a number of dialects: Provençal, Picard, Lorraine Normand, Brittonic too, but that one was a different language altogether, not rooted in Latin. Story 5: Detroit lies to the north, west, and south of Canada. More than half the population of Canada lives south of Seattle. Yeah, most of us Canadians stay close to the southern border. Higher is mostly undeveloped wild land. Fun fact: what we call central Alberta in my province is only like a quarter distance up from the southern border, like way low in the overall province, but since it's central to where most people live, that's what we call it. Story 6: the disk of the sun in the sky is exactly the same size as the disk of the moon, and the chances against that are literally astronomical, and it means nothing. The moon is slowly moving away. It used to appear to be bigger than the sun. At present, it appears to be only slightly bigger than the sun. Eventually, it will appear to be smaller than the sun, at which point, sadly, there will be no more total solar eclipses on Earth. The only part of this that is unlikely is for us to exist at this particular time. Not suggesting you didn't know that, OP, I just think it's pretty cool. Story 7: pluralizing the word octopus is actually pretty complicated linguistically. It has a Greek root, but many Greek words now used in English have been Latinized. So the Latin pluralization octopi is probably the least correct. But a case can still be made for it, and it's an English word now, so the English pluralization octopus has been accepted as correct. However, if you honor the original Greek root, the pluralization would be octopodes. Story 8: the reason most sets of stairs go up in a clockwise manner is from a time when castles, etc., had to be defended. If a siege was taking place, it put those defending at a significant advantage, as they could swing swords or weapons downward with the right arm. Those laying the siege were in an awkward position, swinging up and across instead, making it harder to battle and defend themselves. I had always heard and believed that, and dropped it as a useless and cool fact every now and then to people LOL. Then I read this article recently, and it pretty much shot that down. Now I don't know what to believe. Story 9: the phrase, the whole 9 yards, came from World War II. On the B 24, each machine gun was equipped with 27 feet of ammunition. And when the gunners used all of it, they would say that phrase. That's not how that worked. In simplest terms, there was no set amount of ammunition per gun, yeah? Different stations on different missions carried different amounts, depending on a variety of factors like aircraft weight, weather, expected enemy activity, etc. If you're looking for a published standard for B-24S, the one you'll find repeated most often is 500 to 1,000 RDs per gun. At the low end, that's still significantly more than 9 yards. Story 10, that fish can't fart below 15 meters. That's like 3.5 elephants for you Americans, due to the great water pressure. Instead, they use something called gaseous membrane exchange. Look it up. Fascinating stuff. One time, Sweden actually thought herring farts were Russian submarines. Fish farts are way more advanced than we originally thought. Some fish species use it as communication. Story 11. The reason we have different words for the meat, beef, pork, mutton, and the animal, cow, pig, sheep, dates back to the Norman conquests. The lower class Anglo-Saxons were the hunters and farmers, so used the Anglo-Saxon words, while the upper classes, who only saw the meat when served to their table, were French. Pig became the French pork, which was anglicized to pork. Cow became the French bœuf, which became beef. Sheep was mouton, then mutton. Story 11. In the Spanish-American War, America captured Guam from Spain with no loss of life. The Spanish garrison on Guam hadn't been informed that there was a war going on. When an American cruiser fired warning shots over the Spanish fort, they mistakenly thought it was a salute, a friendly gesture. The Spanish garrison wanted to return the salute, but they were out of gunpowder, so they sent an envoy to the cruiser, the USS Charleston, to pay their respects and to apologize that they lacked the gunpowder to return the gesture. At this point, Captain Henry Glass cheerfully informed them that they were at war and that he would be accepting their surrender. The island's governor formally surrendered the following day. The sole American citizen on Guam, a traitor, was named the new governor until officials were brought in from the States. Story 12. During 2014, a virus known as the water wasting disease had been discovered in species of starfish and other echinoderms on the west coast of the U.S. This virus was causing tons of starfish to lose control of their water vascular system, become limp, and they would rip themselves apart. It was sort of like a zombie disease in which the limbs of starfish would pull away from their bodies and crawl away before just completely dying. It is still unknown why these mass die-offs are happening, and research is still being done today. But there is correlation with this disease and the rising temperatures of our oceans. Story 13. The reason why the United States has to have a modified Kinder egg. This is the abridged version. So, in 1937, there was this medicine that was killing people. 105 people to be exact, and 34 of them were children. The very next year, an act was passed because of this incident, stating that non-nutritional objects or substances shall be inside any edible object. This originally meant poison. The non-nutritional component was poison. But sadly, because of the wording in 1997, this act still stood up to the question of Kinder eggs. You can say, what if we got rid of the law and changed it, right? Well, no, we can't. If we did, food would become completely unsafe. Legal writing is a huge interest of mine, and I really do feel that this leaves us stuck in a legal loop that can't easily be fixed without people getting hurt. So, this is why Kinder came up with the Kinder Joy for the US. This does fix anything, and there's really no reason to know this, but I just think it's interesting. Story 14 in 2012, online pranksters concluded that the Walmart in Kodiak, Alaska was probably their least trafficked store. When Walmart did a promotion with rapper Pitbull to have him visit whichever location got the most likes on Facebook, probably assuming that people would give likes to their local stores, people thought it would be hilarious to send him to the most remote store in Alaska. Despite the obvious tomfoolery, Pitbull went ahead and visited it, receiving keys to the city and some bear repellent. Story 15. Ancient Europeans believed that if they ground up the bones of their greatest warriors or sacred animals and mixed them in with the iron when forging a sword, the sword would contain their spirits, making it stronger. Little did they know that by adding in the ground up bones, they were introducing carbon to the mix and creating carbon steel, which is much stronger than simple iron. So they were making their swords stronger by adding the sacred bones, just not in the way they thought they were. Story 16, Netflix was founded before Google. Even better, in 2000, Netflix offered itself for sale to Blockbuster for something like $50 million. Blockbuster, convinced that Netflix was a flash in the pan and that people would always want to rent discs, declined. This was before streaming was even an idea in the mind of Reed Hastings. Streaming was still a very, very new technology at the time, and most people were still on dial up modems, so it just wasn't feasible. Still, things would certainly be different today. Story 17. This one potentially changed the course of history. Kaiser Wilhelm II of the German Empire was the ruler of Germany during World War I. Though technically a constitutional monarchy at the time, Germany, and its military especially, operated more like an autocratic monarchic state. The top ranks of the German military relied on the personal patronage of the Kaiser for career advancement. Thing is, he was a bit of a man-child. So instead of a jump how high situation, it was more like, here's a dress. It'd be funny if you marched around. In 1908, Field Marshal Dietrich von Hulsen-Heissler was the top-ranking German officer and was only 56 years old. He died that year of a heart attack while marching around for Kaiser dressed in a tutu and a feathered hat, presumably because of the stress and embarrassment of the situation. Had he lived, he would have commanded the German military in World War I. Instead, they entered the war, led by generals who had risen to the rank without ever actually commanding an army in the field. And that is my useless fact of the day. Story 18. The Monopoly game was created by anti-capitalists to prove that capitalism was unfair, but it got stolen by the actual owners who trademarked it and made millions. They also removed the small lines that say, it is about how bad capitalism is in real life. Anti-Monopoly tried to correct this by including this story in their game that opposes capitalists and socialists. Kinda. You talk about it, but never name the game the original creator. The original game was the Landlord game. It had two modes of play, anti-monopolist and monopolist. Monopolist plays are similar to the way we're used to. Everyone is competing from the start. Strategies can only get you so far. Luck really determines the winner. And in order for one to win, everyone else must lose. The anti-monopolist rules were Georgist. There was a lot more cooperation. And if played right, everyone could win. Two big reasons why Monopoly did better than the Landlord's game is that Parker Brothers bought the rights to publish it, barely did, stole the rules for games can't be copywritten, and had a man design a new game around them. So the first big thing was simply marketing. The second was that people like to be competitive. They like to beat their friends. And the idea of everyone winning the game simply wasn't as appealing as beating everyone else to many Americans. I also mentioned that they hired a man to design Monopoly after taking the rules from the Landlord game. It was designed by a woman, Elizabeth Meiji. Story 19. Domesticated house cats often suffer from kidney disease due to lack of water. This is because they'd rather sleep than go to their water bowl and drink. People have started making fountain bowls that have flashing lights so they catch the cat's attention and encourage them to drink more. It's not necessarily that they'd rather sleep. Cats have very poor vision within a few inches of their face, and pools of perfectly still standing water didn't really exist in the desert climate they evolved in. They don't always register bowls of water as something they want to and are able to drink from. Part of the reason cats like to drink from glasses and faucets is they can identify it as water. Combine this with the fact that cats are designed to extract moisture from their diet and are often fed primarily dry food. And you can see why cats can develop chronic dehydration. Story 20, the letter Q, does not appear in any state name. Psycho was the first move to show a flushing toilet. One World Trade Center is 1776 feet tall, a reference to the date of the Declaration of Independence. Days on Venus are longer than years. Disney World in Florida is built on a network of tunnels that mirror the park, so cast members can get to the different lands without spoiling the immersion. The Beatles broke up at Disney World. Disney World in Florida is built on a network of tunnels that mirror the park, so cast members can get to the different lands without spoiling the immersion. Not really so much a network as a circle with a line through it. While it does provide a way for cast members to get to their posts without wearing the wrong costume in the wrong part of the park, the main purpose is to store and transport garbage. There are many, many rooms, alcoves, and designated areas to store garbage until it is taken to the large compacting dumpsters at the employee entrance. As a consequence, most cast members' memories of their time at Disney are largely composed of the smell of rotting garbage. Another fun fact here is that the vast majority of the tunnels are actually above ground level. The substructure and tunnels were built first, and the part constructed on the second floor. The only part of the tunnel to go below ground level is directly under the castle and requires a pump going 24/7 to keep that area from flooding because the water table is so high in Florida. Story 21. Crows are conscious. They are aware of their own existence and have conscious thoughts. They recognize human faces and have funerals for their dead. They can also recognize fast food logos, so they have preferences on what is their favorite. Researchers for the Massachusetts Turnpike Authority recently found over 200 dead crows near Greater Boston. Everyone involved was concerned that these crows might have died from avian flu, so they had a bird pathologist examine the remains of all the crows. To everyone's relief, it was determined that the problem was definitely not the avian flu. Instead, the cause of death looked to be from vehicular impacts. During the detailed analysis of the crows, it was noted that there were varying colors of paints found on the birds' beaks and claws. By analyzing the paint residue, it was found that 98% of the crows had been killed by the impact of trucks, and only 2% were from impact with a car. The Massachusetts Turnpike Authority then hired an ornithological behaviorist to look into the cause for the disproportionate percentages of crows killed by trucks versus crows killed by cars. The ornithological behaviorist came up with the answer very quickly. The cause? When crows eat roadkill, they always have a lookout crow in a nearby tree to warn the other crows of impending danger. While all the lookout crows could say the word caw, none of them could say truck. Story 22. Before the Matterhorn bobsled ride at Disneyland was built, a giant mound of dirt that was excavated for the layout of pretty much all of the original Disneyland, but mostly the castle, was in its place. It was cheaper to just keep it there over hauling it out. Walt fixed the ugly dirt pile with fences and paths and called it Holiday Hill, which had nothing to do with holidays. There was a point near the top where guests could hop the fence and make their way to Makeout Tree, which is just so cool to think about. But Walt found that dangerous and the whole hill to be kind of ugly. Walt went on to shoot a new documentary in Switzerland and left his Imagineers to think of a new weenie to replace Holiday Hill. I can explain what a weenie is in another comment if anyone wants to know. The Imagineers originally came up with a Casey Jr. themed mountain ride called Rock Candy Mountain. Get this, made out of real fucking candy. Real candy. Upon building models and blueprints, though, they kind of realized it would prove difficult to build and maintain an entire mountain out of real candy. One of the employees even said it was a tummy ache waiting to happen. At the time, Wild Mouse coasters were a huge thing. This was before California Adventures, Mulholland Madness, and Goofy's Sky School, so they decided that was a good idea to capitalize on. But upon telling Walt he didn't really enjoy the idea, it wasn't Disney. It wasn't huge. It wasn't a weenie. Paraphrasing. He took some time to think while he was in Switzerland shooting his new documentary that featured the real Matterhorn mountain and was like, yo dogs, Matterhorn. That's how we got the Lil Yeti boy. Story 23. The reason why the plural of goose is geese, but the plural of moose is not meese, is because the English is a Frankenstein nightmare of a language. What I mean is goose in an old Germanic language that has this sort of plural rule. The same rule is applied to tooth and foot. Moose, however, comes from a Native American language, exactly which tribe area I'm unsure of, and does not follow this rule. Story 24. Our mind is evolving every second into something new. It adapts itself to cope with whatever trauma we had and have witnessed and lived through. And this may be a pretty nice thing. But if you think about it, it means that it's only deteriorating itself for the sake of surviving. We are how we are now because otherwise we couldn't survive this society and this world. If someone's mind can't change itself and cope, then that someone becomes crazy in every way and explanation you could think of. This, for me, it's terrifying. Story 25. A few random, pretty obscure space facts that I know. You can't land on Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, or Uranus because they're so-called gas giants and quite literally have no surface. That being said, you can't fly straight through them either. The conditions inside are so bad that they'll completely crush and tear apart the spacecraft. The red spot on Jupiter is actually a storm and is larger than the Earth. I feel like this one is more known, but Uranus has two sets of rings. The inner set consists of 9 rings, and the outer set consists of 2. There's a lot of talk about whether we would be able to colonize Mars or not. It would be very difficult because of extremely cold temperatures, minus 60 degrees Celsius, low gravity, apparent radiation, and its atmosphere. Mars's atmosphere is mainly composed of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and argon. Story 26. About a week before the Great Bear roller coaster was set to open at Hershey Park in the late 1990s, someone realized they had only tested it with average dummies. When they did a test run with dummies taller than 6 inches, the dummy's feet hit a rail on one of the passes near another ride and caused the legs to snap off. This required a redesign, reinstallation, and delayed the opening until the following season, and resulted in the ride being the most expensive roller coaster ever built at that time. Story 27. Violet Jessup was a stewardess on passenger ships in the early 20th century. She was on board each of the Olympic-class vessels when they had their most well-known disasters. The RMS Olympic pulled a smaller ship free of its moorings during departure, and the two smashed together in glorious fashion. Both ships survived. The RMS Titanic, well, we know all about that sinking. She was there. The HMHS Britannic was outfitted as a hospital ship, collided with an underwater mine, or was torpedoed or an internal explosion, speculation persists, and sank in the Mediterranean. Violet barely survived being pulled into the spinning propellers while jumping to the safety of the boats. Story 28. When, future, General of the Army. Douglas MacArthur was attending West Point. His mother moved into a hotel just outside the gate and would often call the commandant to make sure Dougie was doing well and had a lot of the senior West Point staff over for tea often. It should be pointed out that Douglas MacArthur was the first son of a Medal of Honor winner to also himself, later, win the Medal of Honor. So his father, Arthur MacArthur, had already won the MOH, and thus the family was fairly well known inside the Army. Story 29. It's not against the law to escape from prison in Belgium, I think it's Belgium, freedom being such a fundamental desire in humans that to punish someone for fulfilling this desire is like punishing them for breathing. I'm forgetting all the details, but there's a philosophical idea ought implies can. You can't insist on something that someone is incapable of doing, so they can't require someone to deny their fundamental desire to be free. Now, damaging government property, bribing, or assaulting prison guards and the like are all illegal. And if you're caught, you'll be taken back to jail to serve out your sentence. But simply trying to escape isn't going to add to your prison term. Story 30. In 17th century Quebec, a priest was approached by his congregation who asked if a beaver could classify as a fish. Due to the dietary restrictions during Lent at the time requiring no meat be eaten except for fish, as opposed to today, which is just Friday for a bulk of the populace. After pondering, the priest and later church agreed and allowed the beaver, which was plentiful in the area, to be consumed during Lent, massively increasing the quality of their diet. Their justification was that due to the beaver being semi-aquatic and a skilled swimmer, it counted. This is also true for the capybara in South America.